Well, this is my third trip, my third visit to Sonoma and Marin counties. And each time I come, we challenge any doctor, dentist, scientist, public health official who believes in fluoridation to have a public debate.
And I forgot, he wanted me to let you know that we have had, between myself and Steve Fullerwell, we have asked, you want to get your chicken?
Yeah.
We've asked the head of the public health department to provide 2 speakers on the pro-fluoride side, and we thought that would be easy because if it's so good, they'd be anxious to get here, and they didn't show up. Then we asked the Redwood Dental Society to submit a couple names. We called them. One said, "Yeah, I'll be there," then backed out. The other one couldn't even call back, and then we went and politely asked Howard Pollack, because he usually likes to show up at all these things. He, he's got the thing down pat. 50 years he's been, working for the ADA, American Dental Association. So we were surprised that he wouldn't show up. So there you go. He wanted to show you. Who do you have now?
This is Dr. Cluck. Dr. Cluck. So I have to debate Dr. Cluck in lieu of a real human being coming to defend a practice. Now, I don't know if there's any other issue that you are aware of where the people that actively promote it refuse to debate, refuse to come out and defend. Well, I mean, it's not my practice, it's their practice. It's something that they want to do to you, to your water. And yet they feel that they can just thumb their noses at someone like myself, who studied the issue very closely, and refuse to debate. And whilst we're at it, is there anybody from the Press Democrat here? As I said, I have been here 3 times. I've had many meetings. Not one of those meetings has been attended by anybody from the Press Democrat. They have made no effort to phone me or interview me. We've even gone to the length of going to their paper and sitting down in there saying, "We are here, will you talk to us?" Now this is extraordinary. It shows you how easily you can lose your democracy. You can lose your democracy so easily if the press does not do a professional job. Now, what we don't have the right to expect is that people are going to write editorials that we like. That they have the right to write any editorial that they want. That's the beauty of owning a newspaper. But they don't have the right to behave as unprofessionally as they are behaving. And you should be very upset about that, as upset by the way that they're not. I mean, after all, I'm not inflating my credentials. I don't want to do that. I'm not the most important person in the world. But the fact is, this is a big issue right now for this county. And it happens to be that when I'm one of the leading spokespersons for the other side, for the side that's opposed to fluoridation, right in their doorstep, right on their doorstep, they are obliged, from the point of view of covering the news, to cover this story. But they're not doing it. But I predict a few days before the county makes this decision, they will run an editorial. And if they play true to form, that editorial will ridicule anybody that's opposed to fluoridation. Not just argue against fluoridation, they will ridicule the people opposed to fluoridation. So, as I say, it's very easy. Democracy can slip away from us. And we've just got to make sure that the press is on our side in terms of democracy. They're not at the moment. Okay. So, as Donna said, I've spent 17 years researching this issue, first as a professor of chemistry, specializing in environmental chemistry and toxicology, and then as the director of the Fluoride Action Network. And in 2010, this research effort culminated in the publication of the book, The Case Against Fluoride. I know some of you have read that. There it is. Now, this book is understated, not overstated. I'm very pleased I had those two other scientists helping me with this book. And every argument in that book is backed up with references to the scientific literature. 80 pages of references. Now, I stress that because it's been out now for 3 years, and yet there has not been a single solid scientific response to this book from the opponents. So on the one hand, they will not deal with me in public, in person, but even from the safety of their offices, they can't deal with our arguments. And they've got millions of dollars at their disposal. The American Dental Association raises $100 million a year. They've also got the support of the Pew Charitable Trust, which is backed up by a big oil company. And yet, they can't spend that money to come up with the arguments. They should be able to crush me. Crush us. Easily. They have the wherewithal, but of course, as you probably know, they simply don't have the science. So in a way, we should be pleased that they have not responded, because it's just telling us that we are right and they are wrong. The trouble is, they have the power and we don't. Okay, and I've already mentioned that. Now, throughout this talk, I'm going to refer to documents. These documents support everything I'm saying in this presentation. And all those documents have been available thanks to Wes and Therese. They've put all these documents on a CD. They've put my PowerPoint presentation and these documents on a CD, which you can put into your computer at home so that you have the ammunition, okay, that I'm giving you tonight. And this CD will be given to the promoters of fluoridation in this county, the Department of Health here. They will be given this CD, and they will be asked to respond to those documents. And we'll see what happens. So my challenge then to the fluoridation promoters in Sonoma County is you refuse to defend your pro-fluoridation position in an open public debate. I challenge you to respond in writing with appropriate documentation to the arguments and documentation available, which will be available to them on that CD. I'm trying to reduce the amount of wriggle room that these PR artists have. Here are the facts. They're going to be 10 ugly facts, which I shall produce tonight. Let's see what their response is to those. Now, the first part of my presentation, I will explain why fluoridation should not have started. I think most of you are familiar with those arguments, but so it'll be fairly quick. And then the second part, I'm going to give the key moments since 1990 when this practice should have stopped, which should have forced an end to fluoridation. And then thirdly, my challenge to the fluoridation promoters, you've heard that already. If we have time, I'll talk about the better alternatives to fight tooth decay. I don't think I'll have time for the end. I've called it Beyond Reason, the Psychology of Fluoridation Promotion. But you'll have that on the CD, so you can look at that afterwards. Basically, what one is trying to do here is to try to find a rational explanation for irrational behavior. In my view, the continued promotion of fluoridation in the face of the evidence that it doesn't work and the evidence that it poses serious risks is irrational. It's irrational government behavior. And what is the explanation for that? Well, it's very difficult to explain that, but I've tried. So, why fluoridation should not have started in the first place. We should never use the public water supply to deliver medicine, to deliver medical treatment. We shouldn't be treating human beings via the water supply. Why? Well, because once you put the treatment in the water, you can't control who gets it. It goes to everybody, including babies and sick people and so on. And secondly, once you put it in the water, you can't control the dose, which is another no-no. Any pharmacist will tell you, with every drug in their store, you have to control the dose and you have to control who gets the medicine. And lastly, and most importantly, it violates the individual's right to informed consent. I do not understand how doctors in this country, who learn from the very early days of medical school that they have to get the informed consent of their patients before giving them a medicine, that they can't force a patient to take a medicine, can stand by whilst whole governments, in your case California, is forcing this on men, every person in the population, without their informed consent. It's intolerable. Are they sleepwalking? Have they forgotten this principle? You can go to the website of the American Medical Association and you can look how they describe informed consent to medication. And what becomes abundantly clear, if you do that, is that communities are doing to everyone. Marin County is doing, San Rafael is doing to everyone in their community what an individual doctor in San Rafael or San Francisco cannot do to an individual patient. It's absurd. Just one of the many absurdities of this practice. It's not a nutrient. There's not a single process in the body, not a single biochemical process that has been shown to need fluoride in the body. So why are we swallowing it? I mean, you'd think it would be the absolute basic requirement, wouldn't you? You're going to say to people, we're going to put this in your drinking water because it's going to do something to you. You say, okay, what's it going to do to me? I mean, what is it in my body that needs this substance? And they can't come up with anything. Again, it's absurd. But what makes it worse is that whilst they cannot say what it's supposed to be doing good with inside the body, we'll come back to teeth later, but what we can say is all the harm it can do to the body. There's no doubt whatsoever that fluoride is a very, very nasty substance. It can interfere with enzymes, it can interact with G proteins, many, many things. And here is a document I'd like to share with you. This is the fourth document. This is the molecular mechanisms of fluoride toxicity by Barbier and others. This is going to be in your package. This is not your typical lay audience reading material. But for those who have a scientific background, it is very useful to have it all spelled out and summarized. This is the figure that appears at the end of this article, which shows fluoride and explaining all the different processes in the tissues that it can interfere with. So let me state it again. We shouldn't be using the drinking water to deliver any kind of treatment. That's for any medicine, whether you're talking about lithium, whether you're talking about statins, whether you're talking about Prozac, whatever, that some lunatic is going to suggest putting into the water. But fluoride is even worse, because fluoride hasn't even been shown to do any good if you swallow it, and fluoride has been shown to cause a lot of harm, potentially. Yes, of course, we have to argue, we'll argue about what dose causes these effects, but the risks are there. The seventh argument. They like to maintain that 1 part per million, 0.7 parts per million, is very small and won't hurt anybody. But it's not small at all. 1 part per million is 250 times higher than the level of fluoride in mother's milk. This was the fact 17 years ago that persuaded me that this was a silly practice. Because if you believe in fluoridation, then you believe that nature screwed up. That in all the millions of years of evolution, remember we evolved from the sea. The sea has 1.4 parts per million of fluoride. So nature had it in her hand, in her nest, in the primeval fluid. There is fluoride. If she wanted to use it, it was there. And how much do we find in the mother's breast milk? Baby's first meal, practically nothing. If you forget every other fact, remember that one. Because this means that a bottle-fed baby in Sonoma County, if this goes ahead, will be getting 250 times more fluoride than nature intended. And who knows more about what the baby needs? Nature or a bunch of dentists in Chicago? The ADA. Nature knows best. So point number 9, the fluoridation chemicals that they use are not pharmaceutical grade. They're not the same grade as the chemicals that are used in toothpaste and other dental products. These are waste products from the phosphate fertilizer industry. And the single fact that I would like to focus on is that these chemicals usually contain arsenic. Now think about arsenic. It is a human carcinogen. It causes cancer. And according to the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, there is no safe level for a human carcinogen. Right down to 1 molecule, it can cause cancer. Which means that's why they set, see that MCLG, the maximum contaminant level goal for arsenic is 0. That's the best they can do for a safe level. A safe level is 0. And so what we're doing when we're using fluoridated chemicals from the phosphate fertilizer industry, we are knowingly increasing the cancer risk of individuals in the United States. Now, there might not be many cancers, it might be only 5 people that we are killing, we're going to kill each year with cancer from this arsenic. But how can you possibly justify killing people to reduce a certain amount of tooth decay? And we're going to find that isn't very much anyway. You can't justify it. That's what's happening. And the 10th argument here, this is the common sense stuff. The vast majority of countries do not fluoridate their water. So whilst people in the United States, whilst people in Sonoma County, they'll try to persuade you that you are somehow behind progress. All these other cities in the United States are fluoridated, but you are not. It's time to catch up. But if you really want to catch up, if we wanted to catch up, we'd stop fluoridating, because most of the countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. 97% of the European population does not drink fluoridated water. That over half the people on this planet that drink fluoridated water live in the United States. We are the odd one out. We are the odd one out. And you want to keep it that way for Sonoma County. But guess what? So there are some of the European countries that do not fluoridate their water. Yes, 4 of them fluoridate their salt, but the majority of European countries neither fluoridate their water nor their salt. And yet, according to the World Health Organization, that tracks tooth decay in 12-year-olds, there is no difference in tooth decay for a 12-year-old, whether they've grown up in a fluoridated or a non-fluoridated country. So here you see, this is a measure, DMFT is a measure of tooth decay, decayed, missing and filled surfaces in 12-year-olds. Tooth decay in 12-year-olds. And this is mapped from the 1960 through to the present. And you can see that tooth decay is coming down as fast in the non-fluoridated countries, which are all these, as in the fluoridated countries, which are just 4 on that map. And if you look at tooth decay rates today, there is little difference between tooth decay in 12-year-olds, whether they've grown up in a fluoridated or non-fluoridated country. Well, that's not very impressive, is it? If you're going to force this on people. Now, another place where those graphs have been reproduced is in an article in the British Medical Journal by Cheng and others, and that's another supporting document. So you should read that, because that's easy to read, and it gives more background on why prestigious scientists in this case are questioning and rejecting fluoridation. The British Medical Journal. Part 2. So now we get into the meat of the evening. Some of the events since 1980. Actually, it's really 1990, but let's see why I use the word 1980. This is a quote from Aldous Huxley. He said, "The great tragedy of science is that an ugly fact can slay a beautiful theory, a beautiful hypothesis." And this hypothesis of sprinkling a little bit of pixie dust in the drinking water to magically cure tooth decay is a very attractive theory. But like any scientific theory, you've always got to anticipate that at some time in the future, a fact is going to come along which is not consistent with that theory, and that's when real scientists have to reject the theory, if it's not consistent with all the facts. And that's what's not happening with our government. It's not rejecting the theory, even though the facts suggest that they should. So, in this part 2 then, I'm going to go through 10 ugly facts. That's what's on your CD. 10 ugly facts that destroy the beautiful water fluoridation hypothesis. Well, the first ugly fact has quite a long prelude. This is starting in about 1982. A series of articles began to appear in prestigious journals like Nature, like Science, which pointed out that researchers were not finding a difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries. One of the earliest was Leverett in Science in 1982, and then a series of articles by John Cahoon, 84, 85, and 87 in New Zealand. No difference in tooth decay between the fluoridated and non-fluoridated cities. And then Mark Diesendorf in Nature in 1986, and then in 1987, Gray in Canada. And the thrust of all these articles was, we don't seem to be finding a difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. And a good summary of that history is in John Cahoon, Why I Changed My Mind About Water Fluoridation. This is an excellent article from an honest person, a person who did his darndest in New Zealand to promote fluoridation, to promote it as a counsellor in Auckland, to promote it as the chief dental officer of Auckland. And he did a good job. And his employees rewarded him by sending him on a world trip to collect the data that would prove once and for all that fluoridation works. He went to Asia, he went to Australia, he went to North America, and he went to Europe. And behind the scenes, the researchers were saying to him, John, we are not finding a difference in tooth decay between the fluoridated communities and the non-fluoridated communities. He came back to New Zealand, he was very disappointed. His whole life to that point had been promoting fluoridation. And then he read a report which was done for the whole of New Zealand. Same thing. No difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated. At this point, he changed his mind. He spent the rest of his life trying to correct the damage that he had done and opposed fluoridation. And this explains this, Saul on the road to Damascus experience. So, ugly fact number 1. Now, I wanted to go through that prelude because it was in this context, whilst this is happening, that the National Institute of Dental Research spent $4 million of taxpayers' money to do the biggest survey of tooth decay in the United States that had ever been done. This is from 1986 and 87. And the report of that study, that survey, was from Brunel and Carlos. And that is another document that you're going to find in your package. Now, in this document, in Table 6, Brunel and Carlos reported the decayed, missing, and filled permanent surfaces of children aged 5 to 17, and they compared the children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community, that was about 8,000 kids, with children lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, another 8,000 or so. And this is what they found. First of all, let's be clear what we mean by surfaces. The cutting teeth, those top 6 teeth, and those bottom 6 teeth, the cutting teeth, they only have 4 surfaces. We don't count the cutting edge as a surface. And all the rest of the teeth, the chewing teeth, I call them, there's 5 surfaces. And overall, by the time all the teeth have come out in a child's mouth, there's 128 surfaces. So now the question is, how many surfaces are decayed in this study? Well, if you look at the average for all the kids, 5 to 17, in the fluoridated communities, the grand total of decay, average, is 2.8 decayed, missing and filled surfaces. Less than 1/2. And if you looked at all the children in the non-fluoridated, again, average, 3.4. If you subtract 2.8 from 3.4, the saving is 0.6 of 1 tooth surface. Now, I don't think that happens to be very large. Other people think it is large. I don't think that a saving of 0.6 out of over 100 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth is something that I would risk people's lives over, or their brain cells, but they certainly think you can. But one of the surprising things is that even though this was a government-funded study, they didn't present any statistical analysis of this result. They didn't show it was statistically significant, this finding. And now we found out, someone has done the statistical analysis, it wasn't statistically significant. So the best they can come up with is a saving of 0.6, which they didn't even show was statistically significant. That's the best that they've been able to do in the United States with a large survey, and that's in your package. Now, a word of warning here. These very small savings, they inflate them by not reporting them as an absolute saving. They don't talk about the number of tooth surfaces. They talk about the percentage difference. Percentage difference. So this saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface in the paper was reported as an 18% saving. That was the difference, an 18% saving. And I want to show you how deceptive that can be when they deal with percentages and not absolute saving. Now, this is a classic case of deception. What makes it disturbing, it's coming from civil servants, not from public relations outfits, but civil servants, people that we are paying to protect our health. So in Queensland, when they were, in 2007, they were introducing mandatory fluoridation into Queensland. I'm happy to tell you that they've now lifted mandatory fluoridation. They did last year. But this is then, this is 2007. And they told the Queenslanders that there was one town in Queensland that was fluoridated. It was Townsville. And they said that children of fluoridated Townsville had 65% less tooth decay than non-fluoridated Brisbane. They even put this in full-page advertisements in the paper. There it is. See the quote? In Townsville, water supplies have been fluoridated since 1964, resulting in 65% less tooth decay in children than those in Brisbane. Well, wouldn't you be impressed? 65% saving in tooth decay? Well, let's look at what it is. There it is. It was only for one age range. It was for 7-year-olds in this study. The decayed, missing and filled surfaces in Townsville, that's the fluoridated, 0.09. In the non-fluoridated, 0.26. The absolute saving was 0.17 of a tooth surface. But that becomes 65% when you report it as a relative saving. Now, they haven't fudged the arithmetic. There it is, 0.17. divided by the higher number, 0.26, times 100 is 65%. But could you imagine these full-page ads if they said a saving of 0.17 of a tooth surface? How much mileage would they have got from that? And it turns out that this is outrageous example of cherry picking, because if they'd looked at the 9-year-olds, the absolute saving was 0.1 of a tooth surface, which was only 20% relative difference. So they cherry-picked this one age from one study to promote fluoridation. And these, remember, are civil servants. Look at this, gets worse. This, according to Queensland Health, is what teeth are like if they're exposed to fluoridated water. Compare that then with, according to Queensland Health, what teeth look like that are not exposed, without exposure to fluoridated water. Unbelievable! This is fraud with a capital F, because what you're looking at there is baby bottle tooth decay that's got nothing to do with fluoridation or not fluoridation. And does that look like 0.17 of a tooth surface difference? Give me a break. These people should be ashamed of themselves. Now, ugly fact number 2. Several modern studies show that tooth decay does not go up when fluoridation is stopped. There they are, studies done in former East Germany, in Cuba, in Canada, and Finland. And those studies were all carried out by pro-fluoridation dental researchers. So it's not our work. Tooth decay did not go up when fluoridation stopped. Ugly fact number 3. A study, another US government study, the so-called Iowa study, where they've been tracking children from birth. They got a cohort of children they're studying from birth, and they did something that no one else had done before. They actually calculated individual exposure to fluoride. For each child that they had, they calculated how much fluoride he or she had from water, from food, and from swallowing toothpaste, etc. So they're able to calculate the individual dose. And what did they find? They found no relationship between the amount of fluoride these kids were swallowing and tooth decay. No relationship. This is what they actually said. This is what the author said. These findings suggest that achieving a caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake. Now, what they were trying to do, these researchers, is to come up with the optimal dose of fluoride. How many milligrams a day does a child have to swallow to reduce tooth decay? And they had to admit they couldn't determine that because there was no obvious relationship between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride that was swallowed. Well, that's a pretty ugly fact. I mean, I certainly, if this was my practice, I would certainly be upset that and these were, again, pro-fluoridation researchers. They're not our people. This isn't our study, it's their study, financed by the US government, Warren et al. And that's in your documents. Ugly fact number 4. In 1999, the Center for Disease Control conceded that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical, not systemic. Now this makes sense of everything. Makes sense of everything. If fluoride works topically, obviously you're not going to find any difference between whether the water's fluoridated or not if it's topical. And if you're not going to find a relationship between how much fluoride some kid has swallowed and tooth decay if it works topically. And so this, again, was another fact which should have ended fluoridation. When they said, when the number one promoter of fluoridation in this country is the Oral Health Division of the Center for Disease Control. And when they said in this report that it works topically, not systemically, that should have been the end of fluoridation. Because fluoridated toothpaste is universally available. If you use fluoridated toothpaste, you can get the benefit and then spit it out. This way you minimize the exposure to all the other tissues in your body and You're not forcing it on people that don't want it. And you have to wonder why, despite this finding, they continue to promote fluoridation. There's the exact quote. You'll have, I won't bother to go through this, but that's the exact quote from the CDC report. You'll have this in the PowerPoint on your CD. And I've been through that. And then you have the document there. You'll have to search through to find the paragraph which just states what you saw. Ugly fact number 5. The US National Research Council's 3-year review of the toxicity of fluoride clearly shows that fluoride can cause harm at relatively low levels and that there are many unanswered safety questions. I don't know if any of you read the Community Online here, which was advertising this meeting, about my being here. Okay. Well, go to it. Community Online, I think it's called. Immediately after the article, there's an angry letter from a dentist from North Carolina called Stephen Slott. And in there, he's basically saying, ignore this fellow Connet, he's not qualified, he's not this, that, and the other. All he wants to do is to sell his book, and he and his wife are making a fortune out of promoting this irrational anti-fluoridation cause. And he called me a fringe activist. That's what I'm supposed to be, a fringe activist. Now, I want you to bear that in mind, okay? I'm a fringe activist, according to Stephen Slott. But I was invited by this National Research Council to present. I was the only scientist that was asked to present in person the anti-fluoridation case. And what made me particularly happy is that when the report came out, it included much of the material that I had shared with them. Isn't it strange that the National Research Council should use a fringe activist for that purpose? Mr. Stephen Slott.
It's called the Community Voice online, and they recognize that. That's the
Community Voice.
Community Voice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, this NRC report came about because the EPA had asked the National Research Council to review its safe drinking water standard, which is 4 parts per million, which is outrageously high, by the way. And the nice thing about it is that they chose the most balanced panel ever. They had three scientists who were pro-fluoridation, 3 that were anti-fluoridation, and 6 that had not taken a public position. And all 12 looked at this literature. They thought they'd finish it in 1 year. It took them 3.5 years. Okay. And it's a 500-page report. It's available for free online, and it's got about 1,100 references in it. Now, the NRC found that fluoride could cause many harmful effects on the teeth, the bone, and the brain. Now, notice I say fluoride. I'm not saying fluoridation, because they didn't look at fluoridation per se. They looked at all the studies that they could find. And there's no question that fluoride damages health. And they recommended that the EPA lower this safe drinking water standard and determine a new goal. And after 7 years, the EPA has not done that. After 7 years. So we're still living with this old, antiquated standard of 4 parts per million. Mexico has a standard of 1.5. Canada has a standard of 1.5. The World Health Organization has a standard of 1.5. But we, in the United States, have 4 parts per million, supposedly so. Okay. Now, it's interesting to see the ADA and the CDC response to that. The day this massive report came out, the ADA said it has no relevance to water fluoridation because they're only looking at levels of 4 parts per million. This is way above the level at which we fluoridate the water, they said. And it took Tweedledee all of 6 days to come and say essentially the same thing. The CDC came out and said that this 4 parts per million was consistent with their practice of promoting fluoridation. Okay. But what's sad about this is that both of these so-called prestigious bodies don't know the difference between concentration and dose. Everything that they referred to was based upon comparing the concentration which caused harm with the concentration which we use, when what they should have been looking at is the dose. And don't forget, that's something that we can't control. The dose depends on how much water people are drinking. It also depends upon how much fluoride you're getting from other sources. So to state categorically that it's no relevance when they don't even discuss the difference in concentration and dose means that if they were in my class, they would fail toxicology 101. But it's worse than that. Because if they were able to read, and I have my doubts about that, but if they were able to read, chapter 2 in this review was an exposure analysis where they calculated how much different ages of people were getting of fluoride each day. And figure 2.8, this chapter is one of your documents. Look for figure 2.8. There is figure 2.8. And I want to draw your attention to that figure, that dot up there. That is how much a baby that is bottle fed, how much fluoride a baby that's bottle fed. So that's what we're looking at, that top number. And that line that I'm just about to make in red. Oh, I'm sorry about that. For some reason, this line here, there should be a line across here from 0.06. You see 0.06 here? Imagine a line across there. Because that is the safe reference dose. The EPA's safe reference dose for fluoride. And what that is saying is that bottle-fed babies are exceeding the safe reference dose for fluoride drinking fluoridated water. So how can you say that this has no relevance to water fluoridation when a baby drinking fluoridated water is exceeding the EPA's own safe reference dose? It's sheer nonsense. And of course, it should have ended fluoridation. Ugly fact number 6. That fluoridation may actually be killing a few young boys each year. Notice I say may. It's not definite. But certainly there is one study out there which is very concerning. It's a study by Bassin and co-workers from 2006. She's a Harvard. This was her getting her doctorate from Harvard. And what she found is that young boys exposed to fluoridated water, 1 part per million, in their 6th, 7th, or 8th years had a 5 to 7-fold increased risk of succumbing to osteosarcoma by the age of 20. And osteosarcoma is frequently fatal, hence the statement, fluoridation may be killing a few young boys each year in this country. Now, when she published the study in 2006, a letter appeared in the same journal from her thesis advisor and said, "This study is premature. Our larger study will show that it doesn't hold. Her thesis doesn't hold." And he promised this study for the May of 2006, the summer of 2006. We waited. It didn't come out in 2006 or 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. Eventually it came out in 2011. This is the study, the promised study from Chester Douglas. The final study was Kim et al. 2011. And guess what? It did not refute her thesis. And the design meant it couldn't possibly refute her thesis. Because remember, she says it's a window of vulnerability. The key years is during the 6th, 7th, and 8th years. If the kid is exposed to fluoride, then you get this increased risk. The Kim study, their what we call biometric of exposure, their method of determining how much fluoride the kid was exposed to was the bone levels of fluoride at autopsy or biopsy. at diagnosis or death. There is no way that a bone level at when the kid dies or when the kid first is diagnosed can be used to determine what the level of exposure was in the 6th, 7th, and 8th years. It was impossible then for that study by Kim and to refute Bassett. So her study is still unrefuted. But guess what? We still have promoters of fluoridation quoting this statement that the largest study has refuted Bassett's thesis. It has not. Both these documents are on the CD that you can get. They're both there. You can read what I'm saying. It's true. Ugly fact number 7. The CDC confirmed in 2010 that American kids are being hugely overexposed to fluoride. How do we know that? We know that because the early promoters of fluoridation said that at 1 part per million, about 10% of the kids would get a condition called dental fluorosis. This is caused from systemic exposure before the permanent teeth have erupted. And that was thought to be a trade-off. You'd reduce tooth decay, but you wouldn't get too much dental fluorosis. 10% acceptable, very minor. So what did the CDC report in 2010? Answer, they reported that 41% of all American children aged 12 to 15 had dental fluorosis. 41%! And it wasn't all in the very mild. It wasn't all here, very mild dental fluorosis that they were expecting in 10%. That 8.6% were mild, that's up to 50% of the enamel impacted, and 3.6 were either moderate or severe, that's 100% of the enamel impacted. Here's some pictures for you to look at here. This is mild dental fluorosis, up to 50% of the enamel impacted. And this is, and that's 8.6% of American kids. And 3.6 have either moderate or severe. This is 100% of the surface is impacted. So, whether you like that stuff or not, whether you think it's an acceptable trade-off or not, the fact is it means that our kids right now are being overexposed to fluoride. Not just in water, but in food, in pesticides, in pollution, etc. I got 20 minutes to go.
I was just going to say, pause just for a second, if people wanted cards for questions.
We don't want cards, we just don't ask questions. That's
Okay. So, here's a key question. Here's a key question that was never ever asked. If you go to chapters, I think it's 9 and 10 in my book, I talk about a critical event in the history of fluoridation. And that was 1950, when the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation. They endorsed fluoridation before any trials had been completed and before there was any significant health data published. But what they knew then was that kids would get dental fluorosis. The faith, the biblical faith, was that fluoride could damage the growing tooth cells and cause this condition without damaging any other tissue in the child's body. It wasn't damaging the bones, it wasn't damaging the brain, it wasn't doing the endocrine system. No science, just a faith. As if God is out there protecting us from every blooming stupid thing that we do. Thank you, God, very much for protecting our kids from any other damage except teeth. It's unbelievably, it's childlike. It's childlike. There's some protective veil over our stupid governmental decisions against all harm. Now, ugly fact number 8, I would say it's the ugliest fact of all. We now have extensive evidence that fluoride damages the developing and possibly the aging brain as well, the developing brain. And what is that evidence? There are over 40 animal studies show that prolonged exposure to fluoride can damage the brain. There's 19 animal studies that shows that fluoride, mice or rats ingesting fluoride have an impaired capacity to learn and to memorize. 12 studies indicate fluoride causes neurobehavioral deficits. They're all studies standard studies for studying these things. And there are 3 human studies which shows that fluoride damages the fetal brain. This is from aborted fetuses in endemic areas for fluorosis in China. And finally, 37 out of 43 studies shows that fluoride is associated with lowering of IQ in children. That is quite a large database, which has been accumulating since 1991. That database would prevent fluoride from being added to motor oil, let alone being added to our drinking water. Are you insane? Are they insane?
They are.
Yes, yes.
Well, that's right. They are. That's it. That's the rational explanation for this behavior. Anyway, I want to show you something now which, for those who have a computer, can use the internet, this is how you can access all these brain studies. This is the beauty of the internet. We can make all these things available to people now. And one of the things that my son has done is to get a lot of these Chinese studies and have them translated into English and make them available to everyone. But this is how you do it. You go to our website, fluoridealert.org. You go to a button on the top right-hand corner that says Researchers. And then you click on that, and then that will take you to a menu. You go then to Health Database. And having got to Health Database, you then click on Brain Effects, and you get access to all this literature. If you want to do it in one, you can go directly there by putting in fluoridealert.org/issues/health and then brain. Now, what's good about making a note of that, and it will be on your CD, is that you can substitute for brain any other tissue that you want, bone, kidney, etc. And you will get the whole database for those tissues as well. So this is a really marvelous tool that you have here. Now I'm going to concentrate on just one of those IQ studies because I know Zhang pretty well. I visited these 2 villages where the study was done. I can tell you from the point of view of just eyeballing it, these 2 villages were identical in everything that you could think of. They were both rural villages. They had the same diet, they had the same schooling, they had the same lifestyle. They were all rural farmers, and the only obvious difference is there was very little fluoride in the well water of one village and quite a bit in the other village. Less than 0.7 parts per million in the low fluoride village, and between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million in the well water of the high fluoride village. Now they also controlled for lead exposure and iodine, and just recently Zhang has published that they've now looked at arsenic levels, and there's no difference in arsenic levels to explain this phenomenon. What they found was a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and there was a shift in the IQ curve. So here is the black curve, is the IQ of the children in the low fluoride village, and the dotted magenta line is in the high fluoride village. You can see the whole curve has been shifted over. Now this is a very important study. And the ugly fact number 9 is that there's no adequate margin of safety between the level, which causes their attitude to this would be, oh, well, 2.5 to 4.5 is so much bigger than we're exposed to with our fluoridation, but there's more to be added to this. I argue there's no adequate margin of safety to protect all US kids who are drinking fluoridated water from lowered IQ. And this is why. Zhang found that the threshold for this effect, he took all his data, extrapolated, and the level at which the lowering of IQ occurred was 1.9 parts per million. Now that doesn't protect all our children from the range of dose. This is pretty simple. This isn't rocket science. A child in America drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million would get a dose of 2 milligrams per day. 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter, so 2 liters, 2 milligrams a day. What are those Chinese children drinking 1 liter of water at 1.9 parts per million? We get a dose of 1.9 milligrams per day. In other words, the doses overlap. Not the concentration, but the doses overlap. And of course, there's another factor. We have a large range of sensitivity expected in a large population. So typically, what you do if you're a toxicologist, you find the lowest level that causes harm, and divide by a factor of 10 to get to a safe dose for a large population. And the only time that you would not do that is if your study group was equal size and equal diversity. In this case, we were looking at about 300 Chinese children with a uniform genetics, lifestyle, everything's very similar with those kids. But we need to protect all our children, which is different ethnic groups, different lifestyles, different diets, different basic sensitivity. And so you definitely need a safety factor of 10. Well, if you divide the estimated dose of a child drinking 1.9 parts per million, let's assume they're all drinking 1 liter, that would be 1.9 milligrams per day. Apply a safety factor of 10. You wouldn't want any American child drinking more than 0.19 milligrams per day. That's 1 glass of water. You wouldn't want American children. Now, not all of them are going to be impacted, but some of them. And your job as a public health official, if you're going to do something like this, you've got to be sure that you're protecting everybody. Not the average person, but everybody. And they're not. They're not protecting everyone from something as important as this. So, there are the supporting documents, Zhang, 2003 and 2000, A and B. Ugly fact number 10. Some of you know this, I'm sure, that a team from Harvard University actually looked at 27 of these studies. And what's important is they made them available to a bigger audience. So this team of Choi and others did a meta-analysis of 27 of these IQ studies. They published their review in Environmental Health Perspectives, which is one of the most important environmental health journals in the world. And they cautioned that there were many problems, weaknesses in the methodology. No argument about that. There are weaknesses in the methodology. But they also pointed out that the results were remarkably consistent. Bearing in mind these studies were done throughout China, all different parts of China, in India, in Mexico, in Iran. Despite all these differences, the results were consistent. 26 out of the 27 studies found a lowering of IQ in the high versus the low fluoride village. And the average reduction was a hefty 7 IQ points. So this is very important. The Harvard scientists concluded that further investigation of fluoride's lowering of IQ should be a high research priority. Do not hold your breath, because there is no evidence whatsoever that US public health authorities have any interest in pursuing this whatsoever. None. The proponents of fluoridation have criticized these studies, A, for the methodology, which is fair, it's reasonable, but they also criticize, they said that the concentrations were so high, they went up to 11.5 parts per million. But all this does is to indicate once again that these promoters have no understanding of toxicology. Because a toxicologist does not look for the highest dose that causes harm, but the lowest dose that causes harm. So their reference to 11.5 parts per million just indicates they just don't get it. They don't understand what you have to do if you're genuine about protecting the population from a practice like this. But in fact, 8 of the studies, the high fluoride village was less than 3 parts per million. No margin of safety there. And there's the study from Harvard, Choi et al. That's also in your documents.